I'd like to introduce Ya'ara Perlman, who is a PhD candidate in the Department of Near Eastern Studies at Princeton University, where she focuses on early Islamic history. Her dissertation, which she will defend next month, seeks to highlight the significance of female kinship, particularly maternal and milk relations, in securing political appointments during the lifetime of the Prophet, the period of the rightly guided caliphs, and under the Umayyad dynasty. Ya'ara will join the Dan David Society of Fellows in Tel Aviv University in October. Her recent publications include an article in the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society about Muhammad ibn Maslama, the famous companion, and his role in the assassination of Ka'b ibn al-Ashraf, as well as a critical edition of the chapter on idol worship from the Khabar an al-Bashar of Makrizi, which she prepared in collaboration with Michael Lecker. Her lecture is entitled Family Relations and Politics, the Case of Khalid ibn Utufa and Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. Thank you.
I'm sorry that I was not able to make it to Jerusalem for this conference. I should, however, be back in Israel in a couple of months, so I hope to see at least those of you who live in Israel in the very near future. I will very soon defend my dissertation in Princeton, and what I'm going to present is based on one of the dissertation's chapters. In the dissertation, I try to show how family connections influenced political appointments in early Islam, and in the chapter I'm going to present, I will narrow down this argument to the case of Khalid ibn Urfuta and Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. So I will argue that family ties between Khalid and Sa'd stood behind Khalid's military and political career in the early Islamic period. Now, before I begin, I would like to briefly mention the tribal affiliation of the main figures involved, because this is going to be important for the rest of the talk. So, Khalid ibn Urfuta belonged to the tribe of Udra, and Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas was a member of the Zuhra clan of the tribe of Quraysh. Now, Sa'd, as I am sure you well know, was a prominent companion of the Prophet who also commanded the Arab armies during the conquest of Iraq. He reportedly placed Khalid in charge of the Muslim troops at the Battle of Qadisiyah. He granted Khalid command of a force dispatched to Al-Madain, and he also appointed Khalid his deputy in Kufa. So I will focus in this talk on marriage ties between the family of Sa'd and members of Khalid's tribe, the Banu Udra, and I will argue that Khalid owed his successful career to his close ties with Sa'd. Now, before I get to those marriage links, I would like to give you some background about Khalid's tribe, the Banu Udra. And what I'm going to say in this first part of the talk is based primarily on Michael Lecker's article on the Banu Udra, which is found on the Encyclopedia of Islam. So, the Banu Udra were part of the tribal confederation of Quda. Before Islam, they settled in northern Hijaz, and they were particularly associated with the area of Wadi al-Qura. This is the tribe that's associated in the sources with Udrilab. The famous Jamil and Buthaina belong to one of these tribe subdivisions. Now, there is some evidence in the sources for ties between the Udra and the Medinan, Aus, and Khazraj tribes. And specifically, according to one opinion, the ancestral mother of the Aus and the Khazraj was a woman from Udra. And there is also an account that claims that Malik's mother likewise belonged to Udra. Now, this Malik, as you can see, was the father of the 5 branches that formed the tribe of Aus. So, these are some indications in the sources for ties between Udra and the Aus and Khazraj tribes in Medina. But the sources are much more informative about ties between Udra and Quraysh, and especially between Udra and the Banu Zuhra, which was Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas clan. And this brings me to the next topic, ties between the Banu Udra and the Banu Zuhra of Quraysh, and I am still relying here primarily on Michael Lecker's article. So I would like to begin with Rizah ibn Rabi'a, who was the founder of one of the main two groups of the Banu Uzra, and with Zuhura ibn Kilab, who was the eponym of the Banu Zuhra. According to the sources, Rizah's father, Rabi'a, married Fatima, who was the widow of Kilab from Quraysh. Now, this Kilab was the father of Zuhura, and he was also the father of Qusay, who was a distant ancestor of the Prophet. So, in other words, what this chart tries to show is that Rizah and Zuhura were half-brothers. They shared the same mother. So this is the first indication of connections between the two groups. The fact that Rizah, a major figure from Uzra, and Zuhura from Quraysh were half-brothers. And now let's see what other types of connections the two groups shared. So Lecker mentions accounts of an alliance between Khalid ibn Urfuta's family and the Banu Zuhra. In some accounts, we have Khalid ibn Urfuta's grandfather coming to Mecca and making this alliance. And in other accounts, Khalid himself comes to Mecca and becomes an ally of the Banu Zuhra. I will speak about this alliance agreement later on in more detail in the talk. And Lecker also mentions Khalid ibn Urfuta's relative, Abdallah ibn Thalaba ibn Su'ayr. This Abdallah was a client of Zuhura. His mother, according to the sources, belonged to Zuhura, and he was also an expert in Zuhuri genealogy and not the genealogy of his own tribe, the Banu Uzra. Ibn Shihab az-Zuhri is said to have studied the genealogy of the Banu Zuhra together with this Abdallah ibn Thalaba. And speaking of Ibn Shihab az-Zuhri, he is said to have owned an estate in the territory of the Banu Uzra, and this too can be taken as an indication for the two groups' close connections. Lecker also cites two reports from Ibn al-Kalbi's Kitab Mathalib al-Arab. Now, in the first report, we have basically a claim that Sa'id ibn Abi Waqqas' father, Malik, was originally a man from Uzra. He came to Mecca together with Urfuta, who was Khalid's father, became a client of the Banu Zuhra, and ultimately also adopted the clan's genealogy. And in the second account found in this source, we have Caliph Uthman ibn Affan insulting Sa'id's nephew Hashim ibn Utbah and saying to him that he has sort of a heavy walk that's characteristic of members of the Banu Uzra. Now, the wording in this source is Wallahi inni la a'rifu fika in khizal bani Uzra. And Lecker also mentions a claim that Sa'id was the illegitimate son of a man from Uzra. And lastly, he speaks of a marriage link between the families of Sa'id and Khalid, and specifically that another nephew of Sa'id, Nafi ibn Utbah, was married to one of Khalid's daughters. Now, the relationship of Sa'id's family with the tribe of Uzra has also been pointed out briefly in a few other studies. So it has been noted that Sa'id's brother, Utbah, is referred to as a slave of Uzra in a poem by Hassan ibn Thabit. And there is also an account that claims that Malik's mother, or Sa'id's grandmother, belonged to the tribe of Uzra. And lastly, the family of Sa'id ibn Abi Waqqas is also discussed in detail in Asad Ahmed's book, The Religious Elite of the Early Islamic Hijaz. Now, one of this book's chapters is dedicated to Sa'id ibn Abi Waqqas and to his family, and also to the marriage links that existed within his family. And it is striking that out of the 13 wives of Sa'id who are mentioned in this chapter, only one belonged to Quraysh. When we add this detail to everything that we have so far seen regarding Said's family's relationship with the tribe of Udra, it can add to our suspicion that Said was affiliated with the Banu Udra and not with the Banu Zuhura of Quraysh. Okay, so this sums up the first part of the talk, where I basically summarized what's currently known about the relationship between the Banu Zuhura and the Banu Udra. And now in the rest of the talk, I will narrow down the focus to the two families of Sa'id ibn Abi Waqqas and Khalid ibn Urfuta. In the main part of what remains of the talk, I will elaborate on marriage links between the families of Sa'id and Khalid. And as a reminder, we have so far only seen Leker's claim that Nafi, Sa'id's nephew, was married to a daughter of Khalid. Now, the family links that I will discuss are significant because they provide a plausible explanation as to why Khalid was granted various positions by Sa'id. The next two topics I'm going to discuss are going to be much more brief. So I will speak about a marriage that was concluded between Sa'id himself and an unnamed woman from Udra. There is no evidence linking this woman to Khalid's family, but this marriage still adds to our knowledge of the close connections that existed between Sa'id's family and Khalid's tribe. And lastly, I will speak about the Banu Udra's participation in the Battle of Qadisiyah, or lack of participation more precisely. This is the battle in which Sa'id appointed Khalid as deputy commander over the troops. Now, the fact that the tribe of Udra did not have significant representation among the forces supports the conclusion that he was promoted not because he was close to the troops, but for other reasons. And as I argue in this talk, it was primarily because of his family ties with Sa'id. So we're starting with marriage links, and I would first of all like to talk a little bit more about Khalid ibn Urfuta's relative, Abdallah ibn Tha'laba ibn Su'ayl. Now, Abdallah's precise relationship with Khalid is disputed. He was perhaps his cousin, but he could have also been a more remote relative. Now, I've mentioned this Abdallah ibn Tha'laba earlier, and I said, based on Leker's article, that he was a client of Zuhura, that his mother belonged to Zuhura, and that he was an expert in Zuhuri genealogy. But the sources allow us to define his relationship with Zuhura in an even more specific manner. So, according to some accounts, within the Banu Zuhura, he was client specifically of the family of Abu Waqqas. Now, this of course links him directly to the family of Sa'id ibn Abi Waqqas. And as for his mother, according to the sources, she was the great-granddaughter of Uhayb ibn Abd Manaf of the clan of Zuhura. And now you can see this detail represented in a chart. The Zuhuri mother of Abdallah ibn Tha'laba ibn Su'ayl, that's this woman, Jundab's daughter, was the great-granddaughter of Uhayb ibn Abd Manaf. Now, this Uhayb, as you can also see in the chart, was the grandfather of Sa'id ibn Abi Waqqas. So we have here a family link between a relative of Khalid and a woman who was a distant relative of Sa'id. So this is the first family connection between the two families that I wanted to discuss. And now the second family link that I wanted to mention comes from an account about the clientage agreement between the family of Khalid and the Banu Zuhura. I've mentioned this clientage agreement earlier in the talk as one of Michael Leker's indications of the close connections between the Banu Udra and the Banu Zuhura. The main account regarding this agreement, and which Leker also cites in his article, comes from the Kitab al-Munamak of Ibn Habib, and you can see it here in front of you. It basically says, this is just part of the account, but it says that Khalid ibn Urfuta's grandfather Su'ayr came to Mecca and became a client of the Makhzum, Makhzum being another clan of Quraysh, and then he abandoned the Makhzum to become the client of the Banu Abd Manaf ibn Zuhra. So we basically have here an account saying that Su'ayr, Khalid's grandfather, came to Mecca and ultimately became a client of the Banu Zuhra. Now, this account can also be found in the Khabar an el-Bashar of Makrizi, but with an important addition that's not found in the Munamak. So, according to the Khabar an el-Bashar, after Su'ayr came to Mecca and became client of the Banu Zuhra, he also married the daughter of Uhayb ibn Abd Manaf ibn Zuhra. I am putting the two texts from the Munamak and the Khabar an el-Bashar briefly next to one another so that you can see the differences. I marked here some differences in bold, but here is the main difference, that last sentence, which appears in the Khabar an el-Bashar and not in the Munamak, and which informs us that Khalid's grandfather married the daughter of Uhayb ibn Abd Manaf ibn Zuhra. Now, we have already met Uhayb ibn Abd Manaf. This was the father of Sa'id ibn Abi Waqqas. And now we can add to our chart the detail that we have learned about him from the Khabar an el-Bashar, and specifically that his daughter was married to Khalid's grandfather. Now, I added to the chart two additional daughters of Uhayb who are mentioned in the sources because in theory each one of them could have been that wife of Su'ayr. And I also didn't mark Uhayb's daughter as Khalid's grandmother because Su'ayr could have also married other women. But even if Khalid was not the grandson of Uhayb's daughter, this marriage link still demonstrates the close connections that the two families of Sa'id and Khalid shared. Okay, and now we move on to yet another family link between the two families, and arguably the most important one. But first of all, we need a little bit more context about Khalid's participation in the Battle of Qadisiyah. As I noted earlier, Sa'id appointed Khalid as commander of the troops during this battle. According to the history of Tabari, this appointment of Khalid took place because Sa'id was not feeling well, and we are also told that it was not received very well by the troops. There is a lengthy account about how some of the troops revolted against Khalid and how Sa'id handled the situation, and ultimately we are told that Sa'id was able to appease the troops and that they agreed to accept Khalid's authority. The troops' lack of consent for Khalid's appointment is also mentioned in a brief account that's found in a number of lexicographical sources. The account appears in these sources to give an example for the use of the verb imta'ada, which means to be angry. You can see the account here in front of you. This is what it says. When Rustam was killed at Qadisiyah, Sa'id sent to the troops Khalid ibn Urfuta, who was his maternal nephew, ibn Ukhtihi, and they were outraged by this. So we can speculate, based on this account, that the troops were upset because they attributed Khalid's promotion to nepotism. But more significant for our purposes here, we learn of yet another family link between Sa'id and Khalid, and specifically that Khalid was the son of Sa'id's sister, Ibn Ukhtihi. So here is our chart again, and now it is with the new detail about the identity of Khalid's mother. Now, this detail of Sa'id's sister being Khalid's mother is not mentioned in genealogical sources where we would perhaps have expected to learn of it, and instead we learn of it from dictionaries and from works that are dedicated to obscure words in traditions, or gharib al-hadith in Arabic. And this detail which is really hidden in the sources, is crucial in explaining why Khaled rose to prominence. So this concludes this part of the talk, basically of the marriage links that I found between the two families of Said and Khaled. So we've seen the marriage of Khaled's relative and a woman who was a distant relative of Said, the fact that Said's aunt, Uhayb's daughter, was married to Khaled's grandfather, and also the account that claims that Khaled was the son of Said's sister. There was possibly another family link between the two families. It's not mentioned in the paper that I pre-circulated because I found the account about it only a couple of weeks ago. I won't get into too much detail right now about this account. If you want, I can elaborate a little bit more in the Q&A. But basically, this account suggests to me that Khaled was possibly married to one of Said's daughters. So we really have here extensive evidence of the family link that existed between these two families of Said and Khaled. And now I would like to move on to a different account that basically speaks of a marriage that was concluded between Said himself and a woman from the tribe of Udra. The evidence from this marriage comes from a lengthy account which I was able to find in two sources: the Tarikh Medina Dimashq and also the Dalail Nubuwa of Isfahani, and with very few variations. The account is quite long. I'm not going to read it right here. It basically speaks of a snake that followed Said's wife until Said commanded the snake to stay away from her. This report most likely survived in the sources because it makes a good story, but what's important for us here is only the first sentence. Said ibn Abi Waqqas married a woman of the Banu Udra. And here is the new detail in our chart. Now, this marriage link is not recorded in genealogical sources, and to the best of my knowledge, this is the only account that speaks of it. Since this woman appears in the source without a name, we cannot link her directly to Khaled's family, but this marriage still contributes to our knowledge about the close ties of Said's family and Khaled's tribe. And lastly, before I conclude, I would like to get back to the topic of the Battle of Qadisiyah, where Khaled was appointed as deputy commander despite of the troops' resistance. But now I would like to speak about the tribes that fought in this battle, and I would like to show that the tribe of Udra was not really significantly represented among the forces. Fred Donner has already written about the composition of the troops during this battle, and you can see here the summary of his findings in his own words. I'm not going to read this paragraph. Instead, I marked here in orange the tribes that, according to his analysis, participated in this battle. So we see here Nacha, Murad, Madkhij, and so on, but no mention of the tribe of Udra. If the tribe of Udra had significant representation among the forces, it could have led us to think that Khaled was promoted because of his tribal affiliation. But clearly, that was not the case. Other factors appear to have been at play, and as I try to argue in this talk, he was promoted primarily because of his family ties with Said. So to conclude, I've argued in this talk that family connections likely played a decisive factor in the successful career of Khaled ibn Urfuta. Now, let's briefly summarize these connections. We've seen that Rizah ibn Rabi'a, who was a major figure from Udra, was half-brother of Zuhura, that Malik's mother, or Said's grandmother, belonged to Udra. Also the claim that Said's nephew Nafi was married to Khaled's daughter. the accounts of the marriage of Khalid's relative and Jundab's daughter, who was a distant relative of Sa'ed, the marriage of Sa'ed's aunt and Khalid's grandfather, the fact that Khalid's mother was Sa'ed's sister, and also the account of the marriage of Sa'ed to an Udri woman. And I've also mentioned the possibility that Khalid himself was married to one of Sa'ed's daughters, who appears to have also been his cousin. So if we go back to the beginning of the talk, I've mentioned several insults and allegations that are found in the sources regarding Sa'ed's affiliation with the tribe of Udra. For example, the claim that he was the illegitimate son of an Udri man. Allegations of this type should be taken with a grain of salt, but they should not be entirely ignored. They likely derive their power precisely from the fact that Sa'ed was connected to Udra by various family ties, and as I try to argue, also by appointments that were motivated by these ties. The insults that are directed at Sa'ed and his family might well be exaggerated, but the existence of a close connection between him and the Banu Udra is undeniable, and it points to a significant role of family ties in shaping the career of many individuals. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you soon in the Q&A.
Thank you very much.
Questions, comments, please. May I begin by asking you about Makrizi's text? You cite an interesting detail which is not in the Munammaq but only there, and in your written chapter you mention you use two different manuscripts. You cite one manuscript at one point and another manuscript at another, which leads me to more general questions about the edition. I understand that you and Michael Ecker have prepared of this chapter on the idols, and why do you cite a particular manuscript at one point and the second manuscript in a second? Thank you.
So the two manuscripts I used in the chapter were like for different purposes. So like I cited one manuscript that had this detail about the marriage of Sa'ed's aunt and Khalid's grandfather, but then the second manuscript I cited was about another marriage link, which I actually didn't speak about in this talk. It was a bit too much detail, but it was another opinion about basically the identity of Abdallah ibn Thalaba ibn Su'ayd's mother, basically also linking her to Sa'id ibn Abi Waqqas' family, but like a more remote connection. So these are like two different ones. And they're taken from different volumes of the Khabar an al-Bashar, and it's not the same volume, if I remember correctly, that Michael Ecker used in preparing the edition. But yeah, I basically got to this account, like basically from, like by knowing about those manuscripts from working about the idol worship text. So that's sort of how I kind of got to this chapter to begin with. But these are like different volumes of the Khabar an al-Bashar that I used. I hope that answered your question.
Hold the stick. Hey, Yara, it's wonderful to see you. I look forward to seeing you. Yay. Back in Jerusalem. And I want to say I'm completely in awe, not just of all the technology that went into the recording, but in the control of all the biographies and making the connections. It's absolutely amazing. And I'm asking this question because I'm also very much interested in this issue of finding social ties as informing people's actions. So my question is, in one sentence, what is really a historical explanation? I'll explain what I mean. So when does a correlation, in your case, a dense network of ties, actually becomes an explanation? I've explained why, Saad nominated Khalid. Because, these are extremely interconnected world, and it might well be possible that if you would drill in at a different spot, you would also find a lot of connections. Or, you know, that if you would look, I mean, does it really explain why he nominated Khalid, or just somebody from that family? You know what I mean? What I would ask, you know, in another way of framing the question is, can we refine what is it that we are explaining? So does finding all these social ties or family ties provides a sufficient explanation, or is it just the necessary explanation? Because presumably Khalid was also a good warrior, you know, or maybe the fact that he won once, you know, it opened the door for him to do it, and then his success meant other successes and appointments along the way. So maybe we can say that it opened the door for him, or maybe we can say that these connections allow him, you know, a military appointment, but not, I don't know, to ask him to lead the prayer. I'm just sort of thinking, you know, how can we refine exactly the way that social ties explain people's actions, and can we?
Yeah, thanks for this comment, Oded. I'm glad you brought it up. And this is something like that comes up also in the rest of the chapters, because like I try to find those family connections. And if I see also like a political appointment that seems connected, I try to argue that like the two were connected. But I do try to be careful, maybe that didn't show in the talk, like in the chapters themselves, that like I argue that this is a decisive factor, but not the factor. Like this is not the reason, but like that it's a plausible explanation or a key factor. So I try to use things along these lines. But I like your open the door. I might use that as well in the dissertation. So thanks, I agree with what you said.
Thank you.
1 second.
Thank you, Yara.
Thank you. And thanks for inviting me also to this conference. And sorry again that I couldn't make it to Jerusalem.
Are you still there?
Me?
Yes. I have David Powers, I have a question.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Okay. So this is very impressive research and scholarship, as just noted. Two questions. One, well, about the Battle of Qadisiyah, and you mentioned Leuenthal in your footnotes. And if I'm not mistaken, Leuenthal argues that in the earliest sources, the Qadisiyah is not dealt with in any great detail, and that as time goes on, it becomes a major battle. And I wonder what you would have to say about that argument and how it relates to all of the information that you're providing us about Saad. And then a second, unrelated even to your talk, but if I'm not mistaken, Pavel, is Saad on his deathbed, and the prophet, he's on his deathbed and he asks the prophet a question, and the prophet gives him an answer about al-wasiyah fi-thulth or la wasiyah li-warith, but do you have any information? I mean, and it's odd that Saad would be on his deathbed when the prophet gives him a statement, and then he goes on to become this great commander. Do you have any information on his recovery from whatever illness it was that he was suffering before the prophet died, or why he might have been inserted into a hadith, particular hadith that took, you know, in the prophet's lifetime?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I do cite Leuenthal's in the chapter. I was specifically looking at his section on Khalid ibn Urfuta and how he explains the troops' lack of approval for his appointment. So admittedly, I did not read his entire treatment of the Battle of Qadisiyah. It was kind of a side issue in the chapter. So I don't think I can really elaborate on how the battle itself is dealt with in the Muslim sources, or how it its treatment developed, so to speak. And as to your other question, I'm sorry, unfortunately, I can't really give you a great answer there. I'll need to get back to this account and read it. Like, I don't really have anything right now that I can really add or shed light on this. It's interesting, though, that regarding Said's illness, that there was also another battle where he was absent from it because he was reportedly sick. So this is like two different incidents in which Said was not actively participating in this in a battle.
Sorry, this is Eitan speaking. I was just wondering if anyone who is joining us on Zoom and who would like to make a comment or a question, or other people who are sitting with us here. Okay, if not, then I would like to thank you again for this talk, and I hope to see you in Israel soon. And good luck next month.
Thank you very much. Bye.